Good evening. We're going to start the program. Thank you. Good evening and welcome to Public Advocate's 50th anniversary celebration. My name is Bob Olson, and I'm joined by my fellow board member, Alina Ball. We have been looking forward to this evening for a long time, and we're delighted that all of you can be with us. To help us deliver a very warm welcome to all of you, we present a recorded message from a special supporter who goes back to Public Advocate's early years.
Public Advocates possible. I first came across this great organization when Tony Klein, my roommate after law school, told me about it. And I also then met Bob Gnezda, two real characters, smart, aggressive, imaginative, and very persistent in the cause of social justice. So 50 years, 5 decades, you're still at it, doing good in a world and in a country of increasing inequality. So what you're doing is not less important, it's more important than ever before. So keep it going and all the best.
We have a very excited program, but before we get started, we have a lot of people to thank for making tonight's event at this beautiful Commonwealth Club possible.
First, we want to thank our sponsors, beginning with our Trailblazer sponsors, Jamie Studley and Gary Smith, Munger Tolson Olson, Bob and Diane Olson. We also want to thank our alumni reception sponsor, Arnold and Porter. And our Changemaker sponsors, Alsher Burson, the California Wellness Foundation, Jenner and Block, and Pillsbury. And finally, a deep thanks to all of our remaining sponsors. Please see their names on the slides behind me, as well as in the program booklet. We also want to acknowledge the remarkable people who make up Public Advocates. At this point, I would really like all of the members of PA's staff, and also the board members, to please stand up so that we can acknowledge you right now. We always say we have some of the best staff in the business. In particular, we'd like to thank Anita Stearns-Mayo, who chaired the event planning committee. Thank you, Anita. Debbie Harris, Isabella Alegria, Madeline Worgowski, thank you, for their leadership. And the rest of our staff who just worked miracles to make tonight's celebration possible. So let's hear it for them.
We are very blessed to be joined tonight by many of our alumni who started this organization and who have sustained it through 5 decades. We want to begin by acknowledging our 4 founders. 2 of them, Bob Gnezda and Peter Silken, are no longer with us in this world. But we are honored to be joined by members of Bob Gnezda's family, Claudia Veek. Claudia, are you here? Please. Elaine Etroff, are you here, Elaine? And one of Bob's sons, Matt Granazda. Also joining us are our two other visionary founders, Justice Anthony Klein and Sid Walensky. Please stand. And finally, we invite all of our alumni, former staff, board members, and interns to please stand so we can acknowledge and thank you for making Public Advocates what it is today.
Okay, you've heard enough from us. We're going to sit down, but we hope that you enjoy tonight's special 50th anniversary program, beginning with this retrospective of Public Advocates history.
The year was 1971. It was 3 years after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy. A year after the first gay pride marches in New York City, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. And the same year that the Equal Rights Amendment was reintroduced in Congress for debate since 1921. In California, Governor Reagan saw legal aid programs as a direct threat to the economic interest of his political base, and he was actively seeking to defund them. So it was in this context that Public Advocates founders envisioned a different type of law firm, one that could be responsive to the immediate needs of the community, but not have its funding held hostage by politicians like what was happening with legal aid.
Public Advocates may have been born in San Francisco, but it was actually conceived in a Chinese restaurant in Berkeley. Bob Granazda and Tony Klein and I were all Yale alumni, and we each headed up a different government-funded legal service program. I was the first director of litigation of San Francisco Neighborhood Legal Assistance Foundation. Bob was the director of litigation of California Rural Legal Assistance, and Tony was the head of the National Housing Law Project. And our problem was that all of our programs were constantly under attack from the government.
The Republican Party, and Ronald Reagan in particular, and those around him, thought that the idea of the government paying lawyers to represent people to sue the government didn't make sense.
And our strategy sessions in the Chinese restaurant gradually turned to the idea of forming our own nonprofit public interest law firm that would not be dependent on government funds and therefore not be so vulnerable.
It was to accomplish what the legal system had failed to achieve so far, which was to integrate law with social purposes.
I personally wanted us to be named the Golden State Warriors, but that didn't fly.
And that's how Public Advocates was born. They leased an office on Turk Street in San Francisco, and they opened the doors to the first public interest law firm west of the Mississippi River.
One of the first and most important cases that I think I worked on at Public Advocates was the South of Market urban renewal case.
One day, a group of elderly men walked into our law firm, and they asked us if we could provide assistance. They were living in single-room housing in the South of Market area, which was being bought up by the redevelopment agency, and they were being forced out. James Baldwin famously described urban renewal as Negro removal, which is what it was.
The case went on for several years, and resulted in several thousand units of low-cost housing for the elderly people that had lived in south of Martin.
At the time, in the early 1970s, there weren't that many legal organizations that could do that kind of work, so public advocates became a kind of place where all sorts of public interest litigation could happen, from consumers' rights to women's rights to education rights.
My first introduction to public advocates was shortly after I moved to Oakland, California, after living in East Africa. I went by the offices of public advocates on Turk Street, really funky brick walls in the middle of what was really a homeless neighborhood in San Francisco. I sat there and I thought, I don't know where this is or what these people do, but this is the coolest place I've been. Just period.
Public Advocates was just such an energized place in the middle of an energized city and community of public interest lawyers, and it was a thrill to be there.
They were working on a case, Officers for Justice. It was about to go to trial, and they needed somebody to put together the trial notebook. While I waited for my real job to open up, I thought I'd do that. Stayed for 10 years. The Officers for Justice case, which was truly important and groundbreaking, was the first to end in a consent decree, hiring 20% women, 50% people of color.
It was an opportunist time. Many cases live with us today, which has served the entire civil rights and public interest community exceedingly well.
I was involved in filing the Larry P. case. It challenged the use of IQ tests, putting African-American children out of the mainstream and into special classes called mentally retarded classes.
Because of the overuse and reliance of different instruments, testing instruments and evaluation instruments that were not fair and not reflective of the child's capacity, but were basically biased instruments.
We brought a statewide class action that ultimately succeeded in eliminating the disparity, which would have amounted with both generations of 100,000 children out of those classes and back into the mainstream with training.
I would say public advocates probably continues to reinvent what public interest law can be. And I know that it has leaned into the racial equity reckoning in a way that is authentic and stretching.
Public advocates had a diversity of issues. That was always one of its great strengths. The agility and choices that the firm was able to make on behalf of its clients allowed us to move on multiple fronts at the same time.
One of the cases that was so important to me, and I think about it today because of the times we're in, is Yvette Doe versus Belshé. Governor Wilson was seeking to eliminate prenatal care for undocumented immigrant women. So this was a huge issue for the community health centers. The clinics were really in fear, but there were two clinics that came forward as named plaintiffs, La Clínica de la Raza and Tiburcio Vázquez Health Center. I think very brave to come forward as named plaintiffs in that litigation.
We ended up saving prenatal care for, I estimate, about 40,000 women and their children. That really was one of the most probably moving or impactful pieces of litigation that I did.
A movement isn't made from a single court case, winning a lawsuit. It doesn't really end there. You really do have to think about the implementation and what's going to happen. Like, how is that going to actually result in changing the lived experiences of people? And that comes down to people on the ground being engaged and the importance of organizing.
We call this a virtuous circle, and it begins by building authentic relationships with grassroots organizations. And then together we work on identifying what the problems are, what their priorities are. So if we're successful in winning, we can then work to implement it and see it all the way through. An example of the virtuous circle that comes to mind is our work in education. Now, we've been at it for decades, starting with Serrano versus Prieston in the early 70s.
The Serrano case, which ultimately went to the California Supreme Court and won, held that it was a denial of equal protection to use the school financing system and the tax base of each individual school district, because that allowed places like Beverly Hills to have a far better educational system than say, Baldwin Park, which was just a few miles away, just because they had a higher tax base.
Williams versus California was one of the lawsuits that we brought several decades after Serrano to try to improve the learning conditions in schools by focusing on the adequacy of textbooks and materials, the adequacy of teachers and their training, and then the facilities, many of which were in disrepair.
Now, when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking that, there weren't enough AP classes or French horn wasn't taught to the school's orchestra. These are basic things. This was heat in the classrooms, textbooks, desks even. And California was failing its poorer citizens.
And I remember watching on the evening news young lawyers talking about the Williams case. And I had thought about what it meant for me growing up in Fillmore, here right in San Francisco, and being used to substandard schools. And Williams talked about this idea of communities actually having dominion and power over, in this case, public facilities, our schools.
We were successful in winning over $1 billion to get reinvested into schools.
Arnold Schwarzenegger appeared at the press conference and he publicly said he was embarrassed that such a case in this day and age had to be brought.
The next major school funding case we brought was Campaign for Quality Education in California in 2010. To bring that case, we spent years working with community groups, and it really was a grassroots-based lawsuit. And ultimately, the lawsuit was dismissed, and many of those claims made in that lawsuit made their way into the local control funding formula in 2013, where the neediest kids get more to meet their needs, and districts are held accountable for increasing and improving services for those neediest kids.
When we passed the local control funding formula, there were, the State Board of Education and those agencies in Sacramento. Those were places that were completely dominated by really smart bureaucrats, but not necessarily used to having students and families there talking about their experience and demanding to be heard in those rooms.
Public advocates were not just interested in winning the short-term policy victories. Those are very important because they do have an immediate impact on the material conditions of a community. But what we're striving for in the end is to build the strength, the voice, and the influence of these communities so that we can win more transformative change over time.
In early 2011, Facebook decided that they were going to move their headquarters to Menlo Park and build a massive campus for almost 10,000 workers.
And the community was really concerned because it's one of the only remaining communities of color left in Silicon Valley. And there were no precautions or engagement with the community around community needs.
And I think it was a threat in terms of bringing huge numbers of highly paid workers to the area who could very easily push out the mostly Black and Latino residents of East Palo Alto.
We wanted to make sure that they understood the impact they were going to create on the people as they moved in. And sometimes when you're in a place of privilege, you don't get to see that view and understand that very well.
We worked with the Envision, Transform, Build East Palo Alto Coalition to organize around this, bring legal strategies, both against Facebook and the city of Menlo Park, that got, in that round, some commitments from Facebook, but major commitments from the city of Menlo Park to open their doors for affordable housing in a way that they had not for decades.
Public advocates, they made sure that our negotiations were on point, that we were able to get everything that we were asking for, and that it was being addressed.
It's rare to find a legal organization and a group of attorneys that understand the value of community and the community voices and collective power.
Public Advocates has been following the money for a long, long time. And not just following it, but actually advocating and winning big investments in public education, in public transit, in affordable housing, and in climate investments. A particular area of work was focusing on billions of dollars in cap and trade auction revenues in California. And we said, you know what, the way we're going to know if $1 of that cap and trade money is actually benefiting residents in a low-income community, a disadvantaged community, as the statute puts it, is by asking, is the money addressing a priority that the community identified? We were able to then advocate over a period of a couple of years to get that embedded in the California state regulations that govern how this money is spent.
We've learned that to affect change, you have to be able to use multiple tools and multiple strategies. But a fundamental component is essentially a power building strategy. How do you actually build power with impacted residents to win what you need to win?
I think that there's some real tension about how do you make progressive change, right? Because there's people who think, well, you get cozy with the people who have power and you bring them your ideas, and then from the top down, change happens. That's not our model at Public Advocates. We're in those rooms when we need to be in those rooms, but we're in those rooms with the people from the community.
When people are able to engage in the process and see the impact that they can have, then they continue to come back and engage and bring more people with them. And that's when we are able to shift the dynamics of power.
When COVID hit and the first shutdown orders were coming in March of 2020, we were ready. Public Advocates worked with our core partners in Housing Now, core base building groups with tenant members all over the state to articulate demands from renters early on, demanding no rent increases or evictions during the pandemic, demanding rent relief, demanding relief from mortgages, demanding an end to homeless sweeps.
And we saw so clearly, maybe for the first time, what a critical space a school is, not just as a place of learning, but also a place of support and a community resource hub. And so we were well positioned with the network of grassroots partners that we had to do a needs assessment with the California Partnership for the Future of Learning. And so we spoke to more than 600 students and families to find out what was top of mind for them and what they were going through in the pandemic. I think two things really stand out. One was the real need to prioritize mental health in schools. And then number two, that students and families are integral to any decisions that are going to be made and any learning that's going to happen.
The quality of our democracy, it seems to me, is diminishing, and it's frightening. We're living at a frightening time. And I don't think it's too ambitious for a public interest law firm, a modest, small law firm, which has had an inordinate influence during its 50 years of existence, to start thinking maybe in a different way, that what is at stake is that the tools now exist for powerful players to manipulate people in ways that are inimical to the democratic ideals of our system of government.
We think about the kind of communities that we're trying to create externally. It's really important to also judge an organization by the values that it promotes and how it lives inside. And I'm so proud of Public Advocates because there's intention, and there's love, and there's joy, and there's community. A lot of institutions can learn from that intentionality. And why it's important is we have to live our values, both individually and institutionally, and Public Advocates does that. Happy anniversary, Public Advocates.
Good evening, everybody. Buenas noches. Well, I'm Guillermo Mayer, and it's really wonderful to see each one of you tonight, especially after so much time apart. You know, in this pandemic, we've all experienced being separated, and tonight is one of those examples of how beautiful it is to be back in community, to be a part of something much larger than ourselves. What a video that was. It was amazing. And it only captured a slice of the work and of the people. And you're going to hear more about that tonight. We are assembled in this beautiful venue to celebrate the many accomplishments that we've achieved together over the last 50 years, to honor the remarkable people who have made up this organization, and to lift up with love our community partners who have stood with us every step of the way. And we're also here to do some important work of the soul and of our values, to recommit to advancing racial and economic justice, which are at the heart of Public Advocates' mission, because we know that what it's going to take is a multi-generational commitment, with each successive generation making their own important contributions. And as we ground ourselves to make that commitment for the next 50 years, and we think about what do we need to build over those next years, I invite us to draw inspiration from a tradition that has been around for centuries, and it originates more than 8,000 miles from here. I'd like to take you on a quick journey to a place at the foot of the Himalayas. The state of Meghalaya in northeast India is known for its beautiful mountain ranges with deep valleys and fast-flowing rivers. These valleys are the home to the Kazi people, who for centuries have made this lush but harsh terrain their own. You see, this is one of the wettest places on earth. It receives up to 45 feet of rain every year, not inches, feet. That's 13 times Seattle. Right. And in the summer months, the monsoons grow so strong that the rivers in the valleys swell up and grow dangerous. They're deadly to cross, and they separate and cut off dozens of Kazi villages from being able to connect with one another. And without the ability to connect and provide mutual support, the very existence of these villages and these communities would be at risk. But they came up with an ingenious solution centuries ago. They began to plant a tree, a fig tree, along the river on opposite sides. It's a banyai tree, I believe, banyai tree. I might be pronouncing that wrong. And these are very flexible trees, and they put out aerial roots. And what they would do through a process that would take decades is take the roots of a tree and coax them over and across the river and slowly weave them with the emerging roots on the opposite side. The outcome is a living bridge that allows these communities to remain connected. These are remarkable living structures. And today, there's an entire network of living bridges throughout these valleys. They are so strong that they can withstand the harshest of storms. In fact, get this, they grow stronger the older they get as roots mature and become thicker, right? They not only provide protection for the villagers as they cross these unpredictable waters, they also allow entire communities to remain connected and resilient, even in times of peril. But it takes decades to build just one single living bridge. And one lifetime is not enough. So each generation has to transmit to the next the tradition and the knowledge of weaving these roots together, of reinforcing them, and most importantly, of bringing forth new living bridges into existence. One could say that those of us here at home are tasked with doing something very similar in our work for social justice. You see, for 5 decades, Public Advocates has been extending its roots throughout California, across geographies, across culture and language, across so many issue areas, and going through some pretty treacherous political terrain in the process. The purpose is to link up with the emerging roots and leadership of local communities, to slowly build trust, to weave our legal strategies with policy campaigns and the power of grassroots organizing to win systemic change. One could say that we're all tasked with building an entire network of living bridges for social justice that can provide protection against the rising tides of poverty and the howling winds of racism, to connect communities of color and people living in poverty to opportunity in their own neighborhoods, in their own schools, and beyond, so that each and every person can belong in our society. Because if you look at our work in our first 50 years, that's what it all boils down to create the conditions of belonging. And I know we don't talk about our work that way, but I submit to you that belonging continues to be one of the most central conversations of our lifetimes. Who truly belongs in our cities and neighborhoods? Who truly belongs in our schools and universities, in our history books? Who belongs in our workplaces, in our health clinics? Who belongs at the decision-making table, in the census count, in the voting booth? Who belongs in our nation's borders? Can we truly belong in our very own bodies? Right? The yearning to belong, it runs deep in human beings. It begins with ourselves and our families. It extends to our friends and our relationships. And one of the most beautiful expressions of belonging is at the societal level. And that's why it injures the heart to see entire communities systematically excluded. And the rational mind kicks in and says, what are we going to do about it? Right? Now, I know that when I say the word belonging, the last thing you probably think about is a bunch of lawyers. Most people think of lawyers and they immediately want to react like this. There's no belonging in this memo, right? It makes sense. We can be quite adversarial. We do not back down from a righteous fight easily, but for good reason. You see, when everybody belongs, our Black and Latino school children are not relegated to understaffed schools patrolled by armed police. When you belong, you are taught by a caring adult with the support of counselors and nurses and mental health professionals to support your well-being. When you belong, your family does not have to live in constant fear of being evicted or priced out of their home and neighborhood when the greed of the speculative market comes knocking on your front door. When you belong, your political representation matters. And I have to say this, we don't have to put up with elected officials like we're seeing in LA spewing hateful comments as they plot to limit Black political representation for their own twisted sense of political gain. When you belong, your labor is never taken for granted, and neither is your health. The essential work that you do, the contributions you make to society are rewarded by fair wages and benefits. And when you belong, your voice not only matters, it is considered absolutely essential to our democratic system of governance. But creating the conditions of belonging is no easy feat. We've been at it for 50 years. We're going to be at it for 50 more. But like a living bridge, it moves slowly, inch by inch. It takes generations to bring forth these conditions into existence. But that's why we have so much to be thankful for tonight and so much to celebrate, because this hall, this building is filled with generations of people who have given themselves to this work. And tonight, we're gonna, in about a moment, we're gonna begin to recognize some of those individuals and organizations with our Voices of Conscience Award for their vision and their leadership and their activism. Because when things get really hard, these are the folks that show up. Let me close with this by saying thank you. Thank you for your enormous vote of confidence over the last decades. And more importantly, thank you for your trust in those many times that we earned it, and even those times when we didn't, because we're not perfect, but you stuck by with us, and that made all the difference. And thanks to that, we are getting, as we get older, we get more resilient. And I know 50 years is a long time. That's a lot of accomplishment to be proud of. But as far as I'm concerned, with your continued support, Public Advocates is just getting started. Thank you for being here tonight. I hope you enjoy the rest of the program.
Good evening. I'm Jamie Studley, and I'm thrilled to join my friend Abdi Saltani to celebrate 50 years of Public Advocates' leadership, vision, passion, and success. One more time. Abdi and I are also here to honor Marty Glick, a member of Public Advocates' Board of Governors for 30 years and a recipient of a Voices of Conscience Award for distinguished service. I had the profound privilege of being Public Advocates president for 9 years and working with these extraordinary people on building those bridges. I had the privilege also to learn from Marty. Indeed, he was one of the 3 board members who convinced me to enlist to join Public Advocates, for which I will be eternally grateful. Marty has helped shepherd Public Advocates wisely through seasons of both challenge and growth. He has PA, as we call it, in his DNA. You can see that in his devotion to its ideals and the community partnership model, and in his support of its exceptional legal team through thick and thin. Marty is a master of the probing question that defines the debate, and like Memo, he has a moral compass that is steady and true. Public Advocates is very fortunate that Marty has brought his consummate legal skills to some of its most important cases, including Larry P. Tonight, we honor Marty's work with Public Advocates and also his distinguished lifelong defense of the civil rights of low-income communities of color everywhere. Abdi, your turn.
Jamie spoke about Marty's epic contributions to Public Advocates itself. So I would like to speak about his wider impact in civil rights and public interest law. In his role as a partner at Arnold & Porter, he has been a friend to many, many organizations in the civil rights and public interest field through advocacy and public interest litigation. But what I really want to lift up is his role as a public interest attorney at California Rural Legal Assistance, CRLA, early in his career. Marty helped launch CRLA 50 years ago, which to this day champions the rights of farm workers and their children. Marty fought the improper placement of farm workers' children in classes for what at the time was pejoratively called by the state and districts under the law as, quote, educatable, mentally retarded. and wrote about it in his 2019 book, The Soledad Children, The Fight to End Discriminatory IQ Tests. Marty also brought litigation with his colleague Mo Jourdain that ultimately banned the back-breaking short-handled hoe in agricultural fields throughout California. It's my honor and pleasure with Jamie and Memo to present to Marty Glick tonight's Voices of Conscious Award for Distinguished Service. Marty.
Hello, everybody. So many thanks to Public Advocates for this award and for all the really nice words. Let me start by saying this. I can't imagine the program to this point have gone any better in presenting to you all what Public Advocates is. It is, and I say this to everybody who ever asked, the most outstanding organization of its kind that exists today and has existed over the last 50 years. What I want to do tonight in my allotted 3 minutes, and I might go 3.5, is to give a little bit of history. Life is random moments. We all can look back at things we did or didn't do, places we went, decisions we made, and what an incredible, profound difference they made in our lives. And for me, it was in 1963. I was at Ohio State Law School, go Bucks. And there was a job posted in Los Angeles, and I'd never been west of Milwaukee. And so I thought, well, and it was tax, which I actually had an interest in at the time. And IRS, Chief Counsel's Office, Los Angeles. And so I wrote, and I accepted the job. I drove across the country, and I went to work for the summer there in Los Angeles. And I met and became lifelong close friends with a guy who was working there with the unspellable last name of Ganezda. Bob and I hit it off from the start. He was a passionate baseball fan, and Matt knows. And Bob always believed that baseball could bridge any gap. He could talk baseball with anybody, anywhere. And if they were an enemy, when he went to Mississippi, he talked baseball. He said it got him into rooms. And I was in Paris last week, and there was a guy came into the hotel. He was gigantic. And on his shirt, it said, God, Trump, gigantic, guns. And he sat down right next to me, and I thought, well, Bob would talk to this guy. And I heard him say something about the Dallas Cowboys. And so I said, you're a Dallas Cowboy fan? And he said, yes, of course. What about you? And I said, San Francisco, the 49ers. And he said, San Francisco? How could you possibly? He turned his back on me, and I thought, Bob, it didn't work, Bob. Bob and I were also incredibly competitive. It'll surprise all of you. And so we invented games. After work, we'd wad up paper and we'd throw it in wastebaskets, or we'd throw cards. I was really good at that. I liked that game. And Bob had this game that he would open an almanac and take turns putting it in front of each other, and you had 30 seconds to read like crazy. And then you close it up and you quizzed each other. Bob loved that game. He almost always won it. And by the end of the summer, we were really close friends. And we talked not just about games and baseball, but about what we wanted to do with our lives and our careers. And we said, we want to do something that matters, that makes a difference. Bob was he'd worked at the IRS, but he wanted to do something different. So he said, I'm going back to school. Let's work together to figure out how we can do something and do it together. I went back to school, graduated, went to work for the Civil Rights Division, Mississippi and Louisiana. And I would tell Bob, we stayed in touch of, what was going on. And he thought, okay, this is what I want to do. So Bob flew to Washington, arranged with John Doerr for Bob to meet with John. He got hired. He went to look for a house. He put down a deposit, and he went back to California, and he met Jim Lorenz, who founded CRLA. Next week, I'm in Macomb, Mississippi, in my hotel room, and I get a call from Bob Gnezda. And he says, I'm not coming there. You're coming to California. You got 2 weeks to register for the bar exam. I've told this guy who founded the program, Jim Lorenz, that if he wants to hire me, he's got to hire you. We're gonna work in Salinas because it's near Monterey, and we'll have a really good time, and we'll do good work. Those of you who know Bob can hear all this, right? And it turned out, I was skeptical. He whispered on the phone, we're going to end the Bracero program. And I thought, what is that? We did. That was one of the things we did. And so it came to pass, Bob and I worked together in the Salinas office. Bob was the most imaginative, creative. I don't even know how to begin to describe it. He had ideas that it took you a while to understand that it was even possible. And he not only had the idea, but he knew how it would work. And the influence he had on me as I learned all the different ways you can make things happen was truly enormous. And I think it's fair to say that kind of with my own litigation bent and skills and his insane creativity, we were a force. And we had, and we were able to do a lot. I was with CRLA for 8 years. Bob joined, Tony and Sid in founding this great organization. And unfortunately, we lost him last year. But we remained close. We worked on a number of cases together. And I don't think his family would mind if I would say that really today, I super appreciate this award, but I want to say I accept it on behalf of both Bob and myself. Thank you all.
Good evening. I'm Angelica Honko.
And I'm John Affelt. It's our special honor to be able to present an award for outstanding community impact to our longtime partner and co-conspirator, Californians for Justice.
And when we say long time, we do mean long.
PA and CFJ were hashtag relationship goals before hashtags were even a thing. For 22 years, CFJ has been Public Advocate's trusted partner.
From the 2003 Summer Jam to stop the high school exit exam,
to suing the state to stop it from unlawfully treating underprepared teachers as highly qualified, and suing again to force the state to constitutionally adequately fund its public school system.
from mobilizing high school students to file hundreds of complaints under the Williams settlement,
to going toe-to-toe with the most experienced funding capital staff in the fight for more funding under the local control funding formula for high-need students.
To leading the call for relationship-centered schools. CFJ and its student leaders have put student voice on the map in California educational policy.
And they've done so in ways that really walk the walk that they're talking. By leading from the heart, we've seen how their student leaders can shift the weight in a room, shift the energy, shift the culture. And not just by turning out hundreds of students to State Board of Education meetings, which they have done and can do.
But most recently, CFJ has been appointed by the Department of Education to help lead statewide learning for implementing the $4 billion we won together for racially just community schools. By modeling what it means to feel seen, heard, and valued in decision-making spaces, CFJ leaders demonstrate what is possible when we authentically center student voices.
Please join us in presenting with Californians for Justice the Outstanding Community Impact Award.
Accepting on behalf of CFJ's many students, leaders, and organizers over the years is current organizing director Justine Santos.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to Public Advocates for the warm affirmations. I am here to receive this gift on behalf of all the CFJ staff across the state, the whole squad from San Jose to Oakland to Fresno and all the way down to Long Beach. As a statewide youth-powered organization fighting for racial and education justice, so much of our work is strengthened and deepened by important community partners like Public Advocates. We are grateful to PA for lifting us up in this way. Our 2 decades of partnership, movement building, and deep alliance building should tell you all this much, that we ain't new to this, we're true to this. And we know that achieving liberation for our communities will take all of us working together to build power. Just want to give major shout outs to the last 2 decades of CFJ leaders, organizers, movement builders, some of them are even in this room with us today, who have shaped and driven our power building work, our organizers, especially on the ground, who are waging the necessary spade work that builds movement leaders and youth organizers who are ready to engage in the movement for the long haul. Over the years, working with PA, we've been able to build deep relationships with y'all, and we're so thankful. Centering and uplifting relationships is a driving value for Californians for Justice as an organization. The Public Advocates folks are all amazing. We don't only love you all as comrades, but we deeply love you all as people at your core. Sharing wins and campaign victories is all amazing. We're always there at our celebration parties, but at the same time, we deeply appreciate sharing in the joys with you all, in the struggle, in the laughter, and all of that is part of our movement together. So congratulations on 50 years, and we are very much looking forward to another 50 years with you all. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. This is an incredible night. I'm one of the new law fellows here at Public Advocates. My name is Latrell Powell. Thank you. Throughout the course of this night, I've been so nervous, looking forward to this moment, but just to be surrounded by you all, icons when it comes to racial justice, equity work, movement lawyering, community lawyering. It's just so humbling, and so it's with great honor that I get to stand here with Managing Attorney Richard Marcantonio of the Metropolitan Equity Team. And when we just think back over these past onerous, difficult, scary years, We all know that the pandemic made frontline essential workers a household term. We called them heroes, and rightfully so. They kept many of us who could work safely from home alive through the harrowing first months of the COVID pandemic. But too often, calling these heroes, it didn't really translate into action. It just led to unsafe working conditions, overwork due to staffing shortages, a lot of nightmares that only folks who are really on the front lines could see and describe. And it sparked worker-to-worker organizing in many non-union workplaces. It also brought new rank-and-file engagement with existing unions, including our longtime partner, Local 192, of the Amalgamated Transit Union, or ATU. So it is a great privilege of mine to introduce our final honoree, Sultana Adams. When I think of Sultana, I think of my grandmother, Evelyn Jean Wilson, who grew up on Garfield Avenue in San Francisco off the Unique Road Sarah exit in Lakeview area. She was a Muni bus driver for 18 years. And when Memo talks about roots, I take a lot of pride in growing up in the Bay Area, and it's workers like my grandmother that I think of when learning about and honoring Sultana's work. Sultana is a bus operator at AC Transit and a rank-and-file member of ATU Local 192. And through her leadership, absolutely. Through her leadership and organizing to win long overdue hazard pay for the 1,800 members of Local 192, Sultana and her co-workers shone a light on the struggles and injustices facing frontline workers.
Thank you, Latrell. They focused attention on nearly $2 billion in federal emergency aid for Bay Area transit that was just sitting idle. And they translated rhetoric about essential workers into material recognition and compensation. But they did much more than that. They pioneered, with public advocates and our partners, a successful experiment in forging bonds of solidarity between frontline essential workers and the communities they serve. So in honoring Sultana tonight, we invite you to glimpse the exciting future of Public Advocates' community partnership model. It's a future in which our alliances with labor unions extend not just to the elected leaders and staff with whom we've worked so closely over the years, but actually engage with the rank and file members who are the power of labor. And it's a future in which we build power behind our legal and policy advocacy by promoting demands that unite the people we serve, both as workers in the workplace and as residents in their communities. I'm proud to present Sultana Adams with the Voices of Conscience Award for Outstanding Community Leadership. Sultana Adams.
Can you hear me? I am really humbled, and I'm beyond thankful to Public Advocates for this honor. And I must acknowledge first and foremost that I have a long list of people that helped us win hazard pay for ATU 192. I had an amazing committee who we called the Hazard Pay Coalition. Sitting in the audience, Brandy Donaldson, a member of my committee. There was also Jiminette James, Connie McFarland, Dave Lyons, and the entire committee worked tirelessly and consistently in the trenches to make this happen. Richard Marcantonio and the People's Transit Alliance, our transit riders, worked side by side with us. I have to thank my elected officers, President Robert Coleman, who's here, Vice President Brazil, James Jackson, Eric Darby, Josette James, Patricia Locke, and our entire executive board for standing behind us as we partnered with our riders. Now, as a rank and file member, I recognize that when things don't go right, those elected officers, they take the blame. So the fact that they led our membership in supporting this rank and file endeavor took a lot of trust and courage on their part, and I do not take that for granted. And I have to acknowledge our fellow transit workers in the Bay Area because it really was just a beautiful group effort. Workers at BART, VTA, Golden Gate Transit, and Muni. I'm so thankful that they showed up in every way, especially at our hazard pay rally, to add their voices to the chorus that demanded that our managers follow up on their rhetoric of essential workers being heroes. Because we were all called heroes consistently, but treated like anything but. And I also have to give a special thank you to the transit workers at VTA down in San Jose for leading the way and actually having a successful hazard pay rally prior to ours. It was very inspiring. Thank you. And I'm sure every one of us in this room remembers when the shelter in place was ordered. At the very beginning of the pandemic. Now, as transit workers, we remember it because we soon realized that it didn't apply to us. When everyone else was sheltering in place, it was our duty to do the exact opposite. We kept our cities moving every single day, despite a very real fear and possibility of getting COVID-19 and bringing it home to our loved ones. Think about that for a minute. There were no mask mandates, no safety measures, and very little knowledge about the virus itself, except that it could possibly kill us. And to be clear, and please be clear, that all of the safety measures that we even have in place now, including PPE for both ourselves as transit workers as well as our riders, and safety shields for bus operators, are the direct result of workers standing together to demand and let management know that we deserve the right to work in a safe environment. And on the other side of that coin, that our riders deserve to ride in a safe environment. And to add insult to injury, the people that we had to fight to get these safety protections were all working from the comfort of home, meeting with us via Zoom. And their words said, we're essential, but their actions or lack thereof showed us time and time again that they actually thought of us as disposable. As transit workers, partnering with the communities we serve was the most rewarding and enlightening part of this fight. When we were out canvassing our riders, we all quickly realized that most of them assumed that we were already getting hazard pay. And most of them were very angry when they learned otherwise. And when talking to them about the issues they face with public transit, many of them learned that all of their issues were tied directly to a working condition as transit workers that management needs to address. For example, many public transit riders, some of you may be in the room, often complain about late or canceled bus service, we inform them that we are given schedules that are impossible to meet, impossible to stick to with little or no break time, that we have few options for bathrooms while working, and that management wasn't hiring enough transit workers prior to the pandemic. So we were already short workers. This was the magic moment, realizing that we need each other to make public transit better. As transit workers, we have the opportunity to directly serve our communities and have a positive impact on the most vulnerable segments of our population, all while earning a living. It really is a privilege. And this model of worker and rider solidarity makes me extremely hopeful. Continuing to partner with our riders to fight for better working conditions will help our communities actually get the bus service that they deserve, and vice versa. Thank you.
Okay, it's hard to follow that. Can we just give it up to all of the winners tonight? Because it has been... It's an incredible time to be here tonight, and I'm just honored to be with all of you tonight. Buenas noches. I'm Spade de Viveros Walton, and I proudly serve as the Director of Higher Education here at Public Advocates. We're small and mighty. Tonight, we're celebrating the extraordinary people we have worked with over many decades, like the ones you heard about from our history video, and the awardees that we honor tonight. We're recalling a past filled with accomplishments and the struggles that made them possible. But we're also stopping for a moment together to feel the joy and the energy and the deep affection that exists in this Public Advocates community. To fuel that flight and inspire our thoughts as we celebrate, we have a performance by two distinguished artists. Poetic activist Porsche, who's a spoken word performer, author, and artist who has graced many stages, including ones at TED Talk, Google, Apple, and many, many schools and organizations. Joining her is the artistic director of Healdsburg Jazz, Marcus Shelby. He is a renowned bassist, composer, educator, and band leader who, it's been said, that he is synonymous with Bay Area jazz and the spirit of collaboration. Please help me give Porsche and Marcus a very warm Public Advocates welcome.
Ocean, where even evil hides in fear and prey. The waters wash away my existence, you could never drown my spirit. Wrap my neck in the strongest rope your hands could find, pulling and suffocating until tears race down my face and wait for my fiery soul to separate from my body. You could never control my voice. Strip me of everything every human being deserves: love, respect, understanding. Leave me standing naked with nothing but laughter seeping into my ears. You could never take away my dignity. I am here. We are here to stay. How we doing tonight, y'all? All right. I like that. I don't even got to ask y'all to clap again. I like that. My name is Porsche Vale, aka The Poetic Activist. You can follow me on Instagram at The Poetic Activist. I'm very happy to be here. When I was asked to share a poem tonight, I was trying to think of what I wanted the foundation of this poem to be, and a word that I just could not get away from is actually a word that's a part of the title of this organization that we are celebrating, and that is advocate, right? And so real quick, I need a quick show of hands. How many people in this room would call themselves an advocate? Raise those hands high. All right, I'm hoping to see everybody in this room raise their hands, really. All right, and so now I ask that because at some point during this poem, I'm going to ask y'all to participate by standing to your feet. Can you do that for me? All right, I need y'all to look out for that cue. Y'all gonna get it. It's pretty clear. But before I jump to this poem, I just want to say, so I grew up in church, and when we sat in church and listened to the pastor, we weren't quiet. When we heard something that we liked, that spoke to us, that resonated with us, we would say amen. We would snap our fingers, clap our hands, stand up, and do a little dance. So if there's something I say in here that resonates with you, that speaks to you, I need y'all to talk back, because this is not a lecture, right? This is a celebration, right? We're celebrating in here. All right. If you close your eyes, you may be able to hear them. The sweet voices of those whose tears were invisible when their hearts used to beat, crying, "Thank you." They may not have gotten the gift of being seen, but the generations of fruit that were born from their pain have. To be an advocate is to be warrior, relentless, a brave fighter for causes that should be freely given, a position of constant selflessness that requires less of you and more of them, the forgotten ones, the ignored, the ones who've tried so hard to get a selfish world to see them, but to no avail. To be an advocate is to be sun, constant and unapologetic, a ball of fire people count on to show up every day, a feeling of wanting to step into a race and not knowing whether or not you're even going to win. To be an advocate is to be water, a lifeline for those who are thirsty for peace of mind, body, and soul. It flows into the driest of cracks and crevices created by the creature that is evil and hate. It takes the form of whatever a desperate soul needs, ready to heed the words spoken by communities that continue to bleed, continue to grieve for centuries of wounds that have yet to be tended to. See, the air is filled with hands outstretched in hope, in hopes of the moment where broken meets joy, in hopes of the moment where they can see the sky open up and feel like it's okay to be alive. To be an advocate is to rise, to stand, to be what a world needs when there is too much bleeding from wounds that still get no attention, when every single person in this world wants to feel the love and the attention and the excitement of wanting to look up into the sun and say, I matter, I can be, I can live, I can see a future for myself, where I can walk into a doctor's office and afford the visit, or I can work at a job that pays well and allows family time, or I can access an affordable education. To be an advocate is to be lion and lamb, loud enough to make room for the voiceless, but meek enough to actually let them speak. To be an advocate is to step in the ring when another fighter gets tired, when their feet can't stand anymore. To be an advocate is to be unsure of how many scars will kiss bodies during the battle, but certain it must be fought. To be an advocate is to be bold, sold on the idea that fighting for justice comes at a cost you must pay. To be an advocate is to slay the dragon without the expectation of ever being seen as the hero. If you close your eyes, you may be able to hear them. the sweet voices of those whose hearts are still beating because yours beat for them. Because 4 change makers saw no door of opportunity for the underrepresented, so they decided to build one. A door whose access did not rely on riches, status, skin color, or gender. A door that made rights real for real people, freeing them from the evil of inhumane dismissal. I dare every single advocate in this room to stand to your feet right now and smile as you stand and rejoice for the 50 years of warrior, the 50 years of sun, the 50 years of water, of choosing to run in the opposite direction when everyone else went right, suiting up in full armor for the fight for civil rights. Rejoice for the blood, sweat, and tears that came from standing for lives that were on the line. Rejoice as you remember the times when you felt like giving up, but the blood in you would not allow you to throw the towel in, when you spent hours past your time to clock out because the cries of a community rang so loud. Rejoice as you see the work done by a team that chose to stand for those who have been left behind. If you close your eyes, you may be able to see them. The next 50 years of warrior, the next 50 years of sun, the next 50 years of water, of mountains and victories, valleys and overcoming, knowing that everything from 1971 to 2022 has proven to be great, but it's only the beginning.
Can we give another round of applause to Porsche Vayu and Marcus Shelby for their inspiring and moving performance? Good evening, everyone. My name is Sumit Bal. I'm the new Director of Communications at Public Advocates. Thank you. And I'm joined by my colleague and really good friend, Liz Ryan Murray, Project Director of the Alliance for Housing Justice. As one of the newest PA staff members, I'm really honored to be here today to mark this milestone in our history with all of you and to be a part of this really magical night. Tonight, I want to tell you a little bit about someone special who's going to be coming out, who I've had the privilege of working with kind of tangentially. Our distinguished keynote speaker, Ai-jen Poo, who is an internationally known labor leader, organizer, author, and co-founder and president of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. The NDAA, under Ai-jen's leadership, and with the help of more than 200,000 members in 70 U.S. affiliates, has passed Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights in 10 states. She and the National Domestic Workers Alliance members are currently working to pass a national domestic workers bill which would improve the working conditions. So sorry. I'm so sorry, excuse me. She and the National Domestic Workers Alliance members are currently working to pass a national domestic workers bill which would improve the working conditions of millions of women and men who every day take care of us and our loved ones, keep our homes clean, and which, despite all of this, are excluded from basic workers' rights laws.
Anyway.
We are thrilled to welcome Aijen to celebrate our 50th anniversary and our shared dedication to fighting for the rights of low-income communities of color and immigrants.
Thanks, Sumit. I first met Aijen when the Domestic Workers Alliance and National People's Action combined our national conferences into one 10 years ago. It was a massive undertaking, bringing together over 1,000 domestic workers and community leaders from across the country to learn from each other, be joyful with each other, and to together directly confront and hold those in power accountable. As I'm sure you can imagine, it was also very stressful, but you wouldn't have known it being around Aijen. Throughout the event, and really every other time I've been honored to work with or be in space with her, Aijen was an oasis of calm and wisdom, taking time to talk to everyone who approached her with her full, sincere attention while managing a frantic, newly blended team. That is not to say that Aijen is dispassionate or removed. Under that calm is a determined fire, laser-focused on lifting up lifting up people our society has marginalized in their fight for justice and dignity. It's these qualities of Aijen's and her relentless call for us all to live in hope that have inspired me in my work at Public Advocates and the Alliance for Housing Justice. Please join me in welcoming Aijen Poo.
All right, how's everybody feeling? An amazing night, and it is such an honor, such a profound honor for me to be here to help celebrate 50 years of Public Advocates. 50 years, that's a lot of years. I want to thank the staff and the leadership and the board of Public Advocates, and to thank all of you tonight for coming and supporting this extraordinary organization. There are tons of reasons to support Public Advocates, but I wanted to lift up my top three because I think they're particularly important for this moment in our country's history. The first is that they're lawyers. I like lawyers. But they're not just any lawyers. They're the people's lawyers. And I want to share a story about why that's important to the domestic workers movement and me personally. 22 years ago, on the first floor of the Lafayette Avenue Presbyterian Church in Brooklyn, I helped organize domestic workers from different communities, from community-led grassroots organizations in the South Asian community, Filipina, Latinx, Caribbean community. Women, domestic workers started coming together and gathering to share stories and strategize ways of addressing the widespread abuses they encountered every single day. Everything from being fired for getting pregnant, stories of sexual harassment, of not being paid for weeks' worth of work, literally horrific stories of modern-day slavery, and then the daily indignities of not knowing when you could leave work to care for your own children, of constantly being paid late or being surveilled by nanny cams. It was about basic respect and recognition as workers, and really as human beings with inherent dignity. we surface cases involving domestic workers who are mistreated, mostly human trafficking cases. And a group of lawyers at the NYU Immigrant Rights Law Clinic, NYU grad, took up representation of the workers and helped us sue abusive employers. They answered our calls for legal support. And those cases became calls to action to establish rights and protections for the workforce who we learned had been systematically excluded from basic labor rights thanks to the anti-Black racism of Southern Dixiecrats who made sure that they wouldn't have equal protections under the New Deal labor laws. In 2003, we decided to hold our first citywide convention and brought together 250 domestic workers from around the city to share experiences and imagine what rights and protections could look like that would address the injustices they faced. The NYU Law Clinic students were part of the convention and took the ideas we generated together that day, November 3rd of 2003, and they helped us draft them into a bill we called the New York Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. For the next 6 years, we would travel to Albany during the legislative session with vans and buses full of domestic workers and supporters to do lobby visits set up by our lawyers at the clinic and later by our pro bono lawyer, Richard Winston. Thousands of workers would participate in advocating, marching, testifying, speaking truth to power. Until finally in 2010, after nearly 7 years of organizing, New York became the first state in the country to pass a domestic workers' Bill of Rights. And those workers in New York inspired workers all over the country to organize and launch campaigns, and today, 10 states and 3 cities have passed domestic worker bills of rights. And just this past summer, the United States House of Representatives held its first hearing about the essential work of domestic workers and debated the merits of a national domestic workers bill of rights. And all of this happened because workers organized, and workers organized because we had organizers, and our advocacy was impactful because we had the right people's lawyers, guiding us, supporting us, lawyers like the ones at Public Advocates. Today, 22 years later, we are part of a vast and growing ecosystem of organizations, workers, and families fighting for a strong care infrastructure, for childcare, paid family and medical leave, home and community-based services for all, and good jobs for all of the workers in the care economy. In the context of this ecosystem, we are more than the sum of our parts. And we fight to change policy, systems, and culture to value and support caregiving and care work in a whole new way. And every group in the ecosystem brings their skills, their expertise, and capacities to the table. That is how we grow in our impact. The problems that we are trying to solve and the systems we take on, like housing, transportation, and education, the issues and systems that Public Advocates focuses on, these are too big and complex to take on without a strong ecosystem of organizations that can support and help channel the power of the community. We need and deserve the best lawyers around to help solve these challenges. And that is who we have at Public Advocates, which brings me to the second reason to support. This organization has been around for 50 years, and they're in it for the long haul. They are in it to win it for the long haul. And that is important to me because you heard in my story that change takes time. It takes time and patience and intergenerational connection. It took 7 years to pass the first Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. It's taken 85 years for legislation to be introduced in Congress to include domestic workers in federal labor laws. Solving any big problem or addressing inequity in any complex system like education or housing takes generations of hard work. Even at NDWA, we are building upon generations of organizing among domestic workers. Domestic workers like Dorothy Lee Bolden, a Black domestic worker from Georgia who started the National Domestic Workers Union in 1968, or the Black domestic workers who went on strike in 1881, also in Georgia, to raise their pay as washerwomen. We need organizations that have the historical memory about where we have been and how we got here. And it's not just that we don't want to reinvent the wheel, it's that we, our communities, have been through so much, endured, survived, and figured out how to resist and organize in order to move closer to their dreams. And we must know that history. That is the ground that we stand on. Our organizations, like this one, are the holders of our movement memory. They hold the trust and relationships with the community that takes time to build, years like those roots. They hold the stories of failure that we had to learn to see the win. They are the product of risk and sacrifice on the part of all who came before. To sustain an organization for 1 year is a feat. 10 years is a major milestone. NDWA just celebrated our 15th anniversary this year, and it feels like several lifetimes. 50 years is truly humbling and extraordinary. Change takes time, and this organization has proven that it's here to stay and in it to win it for the long haul, which is what it will take. Which then brings me to the final point, which is about winning. People often ask me what keeps me going and how I've sustained myself in this work for 25 years. And I simply have hope. And it's not because I was born an optimist. It's the kind of hope that's grounded. It's because I have seen everyday people inspire movements of people of all walks of life to come together to do extraordinary things. Being an organizer who works with lawyers, storytellers, engineers, all kinds of people in addition to the caregivers and domestic workers in our membership, is like being at Public Advocates. We work with the community, and we're a bridge to whomever and do whatever is needed to win for the people. And we actually win big things. The domestic workers movement, our first wins were for wages owed to trafficked domestic workers. Then we went on to win policy change like the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. We're now fighting for $400 billion in funding for home and community-based services and care for older adults and people with disabilities and the jobs that support them. We've already won $27 billion towards that goal. And these wins matter. On the issues that Public Advocates works on, it's a matter of life and death. And winning is what gives people hope, gives us the collective confidence to continue the fight, even when the odds are against us, which they usually are. Here at Public Advocates, you are winning all the time. We saw a whole video about the incredible historic wins, and just in the last few years, in the midst of a pandemic, extensions and eviction moratoria, keeping people in their homes, rent forgiveness, financial aid expansion for community college students, and so much more. We are facing the toughest political environment of my lifetime. There is a rising far right-wing movement that is taking and consolidating power from school boards to the Supreme Court. And they are coming for the foundation of our society, our democracy itself. This should be a wake-up call for us. We have to get sharper about how we do the work, more focused on building power. And we must remind ourselves, now more than ever before, that we can win. There is no other way to keep people in the fight of our lives for the future of our democracy. We have to believe, no matter what happens, that we can win, that even in the darkness, we can channel light. In fact, that is our job. Public advocates have helped us to believe that we can win because they have actually helped us win for 50 years. We need this organization to be stronger than ever so that we can not only survive the next 50, but we can use every day of it to build the power we need to win the future we deserve. That hope is the first ingredient to a future with justice and a place of honor and belonging for everyone. Without it, nothing else is possible. There is no other path. I have just come from Montgomery, Alabama, where I had the privilege of spending 3 days with Brian Stevenson, who I understand, who I understand was an intern here. Okay, that's impressive. At the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which if you haven't visited, I highly recommend a pilgrimage there. These landmarks, these memorials, are dedicated to helping us understand and reckon with the violence of slavery and racism in our country. And I will leave you with these words of his. Hopelessness is the enemy of justice. Hope allows us to push forward even when the truth is distorted by the people in power. It allows us to stand when they tell us to sit down and to speak when they say, be quiet. We will need to stand when they tell us to sit down and speak when they say, be quiet. And thankfully, Public Advocates is here to stand and speak with us. Thank you, and happy 50th anniversary.
Let's hear it again for Ai-jen Poo. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jasmine Singh, and I'm joined by my fellow board member, Kendra Fox-Davis. Before we wrap up, clap for ourselves and you. Before we wrap up tonight's program, Kendra and I want to share an exciting opportunity on how you, yes, each of you, can directly support the next generation of movement lawyers. As Memo shared earlier, each generation has the responsibility of strengthening the living bridges in our communities. And that includes not taking for granted tomorrow's public interest lawyers and advocates. We must take responsibility for preparing them today.
So unfortunately, as many of us know, each year it becomes harder and harder to be a public interest and a civil rights attorney. The cost of law school continues to rise, And when you factor in 3 years of tuition, housing, sitting for the bar exam, it's a miracle really that any young or old person gets through law school these days. Many of us started law school with the desire to serve our community as a public interest lawyer, but as we rack up debt, that hope quickly vanishes. And we had, all the other slides have been exciting, and this one is just why we got this part of the program. Anyways, as you can see, we're going to get to the inspirational part in just a minute. At UC Hastings, $127,000. At UCLA, go Bruins, but not about this. It's $125,000. At Berkeley, $39,000, and that doesn't include undergraduate debt, which adds tens of thousands of more. And so we all get the picture. When combined, this average debt is over $160,000, and it takes an average of 20 to 25 years to pay back. That's right, that's right.
And, yes, I'm especially passionate about this topic because I myself graduated with more than $200,000 of debt and paid it off for a very long time. And so this debt is actually a huge barrier to students of color who could be tomorrow's movement lawyers. Without them, our communities will not have access to advocates who look like them and who have similar lived experiences. Racial diversity in law schools is bad enough already, and law school debt on top of that is not making it any easier. This directly affects the quality and sustainability of legal services organizations like PA who promote racial justice and who cannot compete with big law firm salaries.
So the good news is that we can do something about this. We're excited to announce tonight that Public Advocates is launching a campaign to raise $100,000 over the next year to establish a loan repayment assistance program for recent and future law school graduates who come to work at PA. Why it's not extended to board members, I'm not sure, but I feel like that's something that should be agendized for our next meeting. One of the vocal champions of this issue at PA is our former executive director, Jamie Studley, who during her tenure drew so much attention to this issue. And tonight, Jamie and her husband, Gary Smith, have a challenge for all of us. Okay, who is the person who... You're my friend. I've been trying to figure out who you are all night long because, okay, we're in a call and response. Okay, so, friend, Jamie and her husband have agreed to make a very generous $25,000 personal gift if PA and our friend can raise the rest. Your name's not Gary, right? You're not Gary. Okay. So we have a great strategy, but a good fundraiser knows that our ultimate goal is that we have to build momentum and excitement, and that means all of us. So we have an opportunity for you.
Okay, so tonight our goal is to raise $10,000, and this is completely doable. If each one of us in the next 5 minutes gives $50. So let me show you. All you need to do is hold up your phone. Everybody get your phones out. Everybody, for real, yes, everyone, get your phones out. There's a QR code on the screen right behind me. I want you to point your phone at the QR code. It's also on the back of your pamphlets. So there's a QR code on the back if your phone can't reach that far. It will automatically give you a link to press, pops up, press that link. That will take you to a page where you can make your gift. So I'm going to give you a few minutes. I'm going to give your gifts right now. So again, if you need a reminder, QR code, phone, click the link, make that donation. I think we can do it. I think we can raise $10,000 in the next few minutes. Do you agree? You think we can do it? Yes? All right, and the reality is we know that not every single person in this room can give $50, right? But others can give much more than $50. And so that's how we reach our goal, by pooling our collective resources, by each of us giving what we can give, because every gift matters.
So at this point in our script, it says free flow section. So there was a suggestion that we try to tell funny stories. I was trying to come up with a story that involved me being broke that was funny and not depressing. And there's not a lot of them. But I'll tell you one while you're just completing the donation. So when I was working at an unnamed civil rights organization in the same building as Public Advocates, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. And we were all broke, okay? And there was a night where I was driving home. I'm not gonna look at Abdi because I also worked for him, but my salary was better there. So there was a night where we were driving home. We had been collecting declarations in opposition to gang injunction. And I got my car out of the lot and it had no gas in the tank. And I was like, man, how am I get home? I am a public interest lawyer with no gas money. And so I got on the bridge and counted my little pennies and I said, I can't go to the gas station, I have 73 cents. I don't even know how far this is going to stretch. So I called a couple friends, no one could help me. Everybody was broke just like me. We didn't have any loan repayment back then. I called my father and I was like, Daddy, I think I'm about to run out of gas on the Bay Bridge. And he said, aren't you supposed to be a lawyer? That was the best I could come up with. The other ones are all real sad. So, as someone who is literally completing their public loan forgiveness, their public service forgiveness application this week, I can just say that having this sort of support as an attorney early in my career would have empowered me to make so many decisions. And what we really want is to be able to correct and remedy an internal injustice in our field, which is that those of us who are from impacted communities face additional barriers when we're trying to go into public interest law, right? We want attorneys who know what it's like to rely on public transportation. We want attorneys who have gone to public schools. We want attorneys who know what it's like to face eviction and for affordable housing to be a lifeline. And for us to be able to do that, we need to be able to work at organizations for what we are worth. And this program will do just that. So raise your hand. Well, raise your hand if you gave us $50. Raise your hand if you gave us some dollars. Wonderful. Raise your hand if you didn't give us money, but you're going to go talk to our friend right over there, and he's going to make your donation for you. That's me. That's me.
We'll close by just thanking you all for your generosity. We know that each person has their own personal obligations, including potentially your own loans. And you may be wondering, how can I contribute to my own and to a movement at the same time? And it's because you're contributing to a movement that creates power and really generates support for the next generation of movement lawyers, which is really important. So thank you so much for your contributions and your generosity.
We're up to $5,373. And I want to thank those of you who gave and were able to fill out the form. We're going to keep that QR code active for at least more than a week. You can continue to fill it out tonight. You can take the program booklet. It's back there in the morning when you're thinking about what a great time you had tonight. Scan it, finish it out. Our future depends on amazing advocates, including lawyers that know how to be part of a people's law firm. And you can help us make that happen. This brings us to the end of our program. Thank you for being with us. We invite you to join us for coffee, tea, and dessert right outside and continue mingling. Thank you for being here.